have that grow as much as possible. So at this point, I am excited to kick us off this morning with some incredible human beings. I'm honored to share the space with Nokia Becerra and Nichole Aguirre. I've had the honor of working with both of these professionals when our paths crossed in Austin ISD, where we all worked together in Texas. Their stories are ones that I believe will anchor the digital inclusion imperative from both a personal and a professional angle. While the N50 project includes supporting access and adoption in many different geographies, there is a common theme that often emerges, and it's education. Education is a strong thread that runs through a lot of what adoption is all about and being meaningfully digitally included. And this shows up in our models and projects, from early learning to adult skilling and workforce development. At the heart of it, we are all learning human beings, right? We experience the impact of learning and whether it's effective or not. So our participants may notice that Kia and Nichole are twin sisters. They are both committed to missions that support digital inclusion at the core. There's no better metaphor in my mind for the power of partnership than this sister relationship. And so you will see that this that they are two people who there is no challenge that they cannot solve, and they work together and are a perfect ideation of what it means to work together to solve hard problems. So N50 projects are like that too, and together we represent that multiplier effect. So now to Nichole and Nokia. They are at their core focused on community, but their professional careers have taken them in two really interesting paths. Kia represents a journey from the public sphere of public education to the private sphere, to Dell Technologies, who is an N50 partner. And Nichole has moved from the local level of educational environment to the state level to innovate change. Collectively, they represent efforts to impact early childhood all the way up to higher education. And at one point in time, they even worked together to implement the one-to-one device rollout for one device per student in Austin ISD, working with teachers and students to access and integrate technology meaningfully in the classroom. They're both currently at the tail end of completing their PhDs, and it's my honor to introduce these change makers. So to kick us off, Nichole and Nokia, will you please introduce yourself and give us a taste of how your careers have impacted your understanding of digital inclusion and how your current roles, you're working on digital inclusion challenges?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that wonderful and kind introduction, Dr. Bown-Anderson. But everybody, I'm super excited to be here with you all this morning. My name is Nokia Becerra, and I like to introduce myself as being a digital native. And you might wonder, what does that mean? It means that I was born into a world where the internet existed. Isn't that crazy? Although I am older than Google, which I have a lot of fun saying to students that I used to work with, I'm super excited to talk to you all. So to speak to my journey in the education world, I go all the way back to my experiences of college. I attended Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas, and the final class you take in the education department is a class called Teaching for Social Justice. And in this class, we learned that as educators, it is our responsibility to serve others and to really change and impact the lives of kids that we interact with so that they have access and opportunity in their futures. And so I took that from Southwestern and I've carried that with me through every job, every experience that I've carried as an educator. And so out of Southwestern, I have the awesome experience of being a teacher in Austin ISD, a large urban school district in Central Texas, as well as working for the University of Texas charter system. And so my experience as a classroom teacher was I wanted to give my kids as much access to the outside world as possible. Now, this was before we were one-to-one, and I did work in a Title I school. And so I really sought to bring in ways for my student to connect to things digitally. And so I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but there was this really cool thing that was just starting up, and it's called Donors Choose. And I was a first-year teacher. I did this project. I was like, I need iPads for my kids to change how I teach in the classroom, to provide some independent learning opportunities and different things like that. So I set up my little Donors Choose, and collectively with people around the United States, possibly around the world, they funded a project where I was able to get 2 iPads in my classroom to allow students to do their own independent study, research. And I know that I was the teacher, but I truly believe I'm not the expert. And so if there was a time I didn't know something, we had our iPads to go and look it up and figure out that answer. From teaching, I went on into the world of coaching, administration at both the campus level and the district level. My last job in Austin ISD, I was the director of academics. And so you go from impacting a classroom to impacting a school to making impact district-wide. And so that was a really fascinating career or job, because I did that during a pandemic. And so we had started in Austin ISD going one-to-one at the high school level, and we didn't have that at the elementary level. And so we quickly had to pivot, and we had strong leadership who worked very quickly to get devices in the hands of our students, right? Because one of the things that does exist in the digital world is a gap of those who have access to technology and are learning the skills for our future world and those jobs that don't exist, and those who historically have not had access. And so as a district, we were able to provide a one-to-one opportunity for our students so that they still had access to their teachers, to their peers, to their counselors, to school-related resources. And so one of the things that was powerful is that we ensured that we didn't leave any kids out. Every kid got a device. Teachers had devices so that they continue that learning experience in a new mode. And then one of the things that are connected with that is, as an educator, it's our responsibility to prepare kiddos and our learners and our students for jobs that don't exist. So what does that mean? We need to give them access. We need to give them resources, not just to certain demographics, not to certain students, but to all students. And so you might wonder, you had such a cool career in the K-12 sector. How did you get into the corporate world? And so I have been with Dell Technologies for about the last 6 months. I transitioned at the end of the last school year, and I had to ensure that Dell Technologies was aligned to my personal beliefs and philosophy on education. And Dell truly believes in giving access. Now, as Dell, we're not the experts, and we know that we have to connect with people who are experts and believe in that mission of including and giving resources and access to all. And so we are excited to be a partner with N50 because they believe in our mission of serving others and ensuring that that equity gap doesn't increase, but that it gets smaller and smaller, and hopefully we can close it. So I will stop there and pass it over to my sister.
Thanks, Nichole.
Thanks for that, Kia. Thank you again to Dr. Erin Bown-Anderson for inviting us today to engage in this conversation with you all. I think that the work that you're doing, it's really important. And so I am super excited to join in to this conversation. Again, Erin named at the top of the call, Nichole and I are twins. And as twin sisters who are very close, we had a very similar path. I too started in the classroom. I have a background in teaching in an early childhood setting. I taught kindergarten and pre-K, and in my role as a classroom teacher, I too worked in Title I schools. And so some of the disconnects that you see in Title I schools are kids don't necessarily have the access to innovative learning models because priorities are focused elsewhere. And so because of that, I made sure that I too went out and found the resources to ensure that my students had learning opportunities that would prepare them for whatever future it is that they decided to pursue. And from my role as a classroom teacher, I did move into a district technology design role where I was able to support schools schools, campuses, district leaders in launching the one-to-one device experience at our secondary levels in Austin ISD, similar to what Nokia shared. And what I've learned in that role was, you really have to focus on the partnership and building relationships with the teachers, the students, to ensure that everyone has what they need in order to be successful, especially when you're pursuing innovative learning models. And I've carried this spirit with me from being a classroom teacher, a district level coach, to a campus leader and a district leader. Worked in talent acquisition supporting adult learning, and then switched roles into being the director of virtual education innovation at the Texas Education Agency. And so my support roles went from classroom teacher to supporting the students that I had in my room and making sure that they had a quality learning experience, to supporting adults and providing those quality learning experiences, and then moving on to the state level where I support school district leaders across the state to impact the learning experiences of 5.5 million children across the state of Texas. So I'll be speaking more around, the Texas context because of my current role, but what we all know, COVID thrust us into this world of virtual learning. And because it happened so quickly, many of our educators just simply weren't prepared to provide these quality learning experiences for their students. And due to that, we saw a huge decrease in student outcomes. But as we moved quickly to launch these really innovative programs and virtual learning, providing devices, we quickly found out that there were gaps in connectivity for many regions across the state. Texas has a lot of rural areas. And how can you make sure that everybody's digitally included when they don't have the basic infrastructure to even access the learning opportunities? So as a state, one of the first things we did, we launched an initiative called Operation Connectivity, where we ensured that every student across the state had access to internet or high-speed internet, or as quick as we could get it, enough for them to be able to access learning within their school districts. But one of the challenges that we faced in moving forward in providing learning opportunities is currently in Texas. Again, we moved quickly to pivot and readjust our learning structures to provide remote learning opportunities, but Texas as a state had no policy or statute in place that allowed for local school districts to provide virtual learning opportunities. So what we did was, there is a bill right now, it's called Senate Bill 15, and it allows districts, granted they meet certain criteria, to launch virtual learning programs, whether it be hybrid, remote synchronous, or asynchronous learning opportunities. However, a challenge that we found is this bill also included an expiration date, because Texas wanted to make sure that whatever we put in place is a temporary solution that will be explored as future policy is developed through the work of the Texas Commission on Virtual Education. And so because of that, many districts were dissuaded from pursuing innovative models and digital inclusivity because there may or may not be a path forward to continue these models in the future. So a challenge that we face is, how do we encourage folks to innovate and provide these opportunities for all of their students, regardless of what the future may or may not hold? I'm not sure how many of you have experience working in policy, but we do know that it's ever changing until the bill is signed. And so we're just in the space of exploring and learning from districts what's working and what's not working. So I'll say, through the work of the Texas Commission on Virtual Education, it launched earlier this year in February, we learned quite a few lessons. We've had the opportunity to hear from in-state practitioners, out-of-state practitioners. And one of the things that we have found, I think that is a really key takeaway, is we have to focus on designing sustainable systems. It's not so much as, we've noticed that this region or this district has an issue, we've got a solution for you. We're going to come out, we're going to show you how to do it. Once we've got you set up, we're going to leave. What we have found is that is not something that our school districts want. Our school districts want to have sustainable future systems that last over time, where it is built into their ecosystem. And so by doing that, you avoid implementing something or launching a new initiative that's easily abandoned, because folks have a firm understanding of how it is grounded into the work that we're doing. And so in thinking about building these sustainable systems, you want to ensure that you are including all key stakeholders in designing that system, because the last thing you want to do is to design a fragmented program where folks are having to go to this group to get this solution. They have to go to another group to get another solution. And then you may find out that solutions aren't talking to one another. And that's a frustrating experience for the end user. So as we design these sustainable systems, we're making sure that we take into account all of the voices that should be incorporated into this work. So that way, when we get to that end product, we have a solid solution for school systems that are sustainable over time. Because the last thing we want is for folks to understand, oh yeah, we've got to have these types of approaches and these equitable learning experiences for all of our students and get on that bandwagon. But when they get ready to get into the weeds of the work, they find out that it's too difficult to do and they don't want to pursue that option. So we want to make sure that we are sustaining solutions for the future. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking
Yeah.
you're so beautifully describing this ecosystem, right? That we are in an ecosystem, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whatever the desired outcome, that we're part of an ecosystem. If we take education and thread that needle through your early childhood experiences all the way through higher education and the workforce, but also recognizing through the one-to-one deployments and some of these policy implications that sometimes we like to try to focus on the teacher or the student experience, but recognizing that the community, the family structure, and support of the family and community structures is a really important component that I know we've had lots of conversations around, making sure and attending to the needs of that end user as you're describing, right? That family, and thinking about folks on this call who are also thinking about family structures in all different kinds of geographies, and knowing that the implications of what is done, whether through policy or through any pulling of the thread, right? We're going to impact early childhood. We're going to impact higher ed. It has a ripple effect. And so I just wanted to point out how beautifully you're speaking to that ecosystem approach, and I'd cut you off as well, Nichole. So
oh no, I was actually closing. All I was going to say is that, you know, when you focus on bringing all of the partners into the process, you can truly design that better user experience for all of our providers, which ultimately at the end of the day impact the student learning experience. And that's what we're here for, is we want to make sure that, you know, we are doing what's best for students at all times. And so keeping that in the forefront as you design, it's going to be a win-win for all of us in the end.
So there is a question in the chat too about sustainability, right? What are you doing, or what is an example of a major obstacle to sustainability, and what are you doing to overcome it from either the state level or from your higher ed connection and education as an education strategist?
Yeah, I can jump in here if that's okay, Kia. I would say the biggest challenge that we have is that currently in Texas, we have the Texas Virtual School Network, which is under a moratorium. And so there are no other districts that can join in the virtual school network. And so Texas just wasn't set up to offer virtual learning. And so because of that, the governor commissioned the Texas Commission on Virtual Education. And so the challenge that we face is that the existing statute is going to go away. And because of that, it wasn't enticing for districts to go for launching these innovative models within their school districts. So many students were not able to participate in these virtual learning modes simply because of statute. And so the way that we're mitigating that challenge and moving forward is we're taking into account data, outcomes, voices of practitioners, voices of experts, to try to design policy for moving forward that districts will want to adopt to continue providing equitable virtual learning options for students across the state of Texas. But that's the biggest challenge is getting the policy right to make sure that students across the state have access to these learning modes. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Nokia.
Yes, first of all, that is an excellent question, because we're always going to run into those obstacles and those challenges. But one of the things that I like to think of myself as an education strategist and the folks on my team is we are not the experts, we are the bridgers. And so how do we connect to the people who have the answers and the solutions and innovate together? And so I really think that is going to be the key piece. And it kind of connects to the following question that came in the chat about how do you balance time of including the voices of all stakeholders? You know, we know that time is always going to be there. It's always going to, we have that constraint. And we also have to act with a sense of urgency, because those who are included in that demographic who have historically been left out, we don't have a second to waste. Like, every second matters. And so I do understand that, but I do believe that you have to go slow to go fast. And once we can start developing those sustainable systems that incorporate their voices, truly understand their lived experiences and the realities that they face, then we can create solutions that we can move forward. A lot of times I feel like we're creating solutions and systems without incorporating what people are truly experiencing or what they believe that they need. And then we're constantly in that like, I think like a hamster wheel of running and chasing to figure out, okay, how do we patch this? How do we fix that? How do we do that? And we just keep going and going and going. And so I really think it's important that we go slow to go fast.
That's a great point. Another question from the chat. So the pandemic brought many changes. Can you share some examples of changes that have been positive, enduring, that help address digital inclusivity? What is the flip side?
That's beautiful. One of the things that I attended a panel on of a group of education leaders, and they were talking about, it's not about the technology until it is. When we think about digital inclusion, the digital world moves at a crazy fast pace. We have students, we have people in our community, adults who have been left out of what technology can provide. And so when I say it's not about the technology until it is, I'm talking about communication devices as an example, right? There are people who have had thought, who have had ideas and want to connect and get their voices out and be heard, but their bodies are different and work differently. And now we can provide them with the device to share what they know, to connect with their families and connect with the world at large. And so when some people are like, yeah, technology is moving, we, the people, have the knowledge, we are the educators, we are the voice of reason, right? Yes, and technology is a tool that can connect and bring people together. And I believe that that is one of the missions of N50, is like, how do we work as a bridge? How do we connect and bring people together without leaving people out? And so I think that the pandemic forced us to use digital resources, digital tools, devices to connect teachers to students. I do believe that one of the biggest things as an educator for me is that it really forced us to think about differentiated and personalized learning. How do I allow students who are advanced to move forward? How do I allow opportunities for students who need additional time to take their time and demonstrate their understanding? You know, it took us away from a pencil paper test. Kids could show their learning in a variety of ways: a music video, a YouTube video, a TikTok, a song, right? And we all had access to that. So I think there were a lot of things that came out that forced us to try new things and do things differently that we need to continue as we go forward. I'll stop there.
I love that.
I can stay on that.
I love that. I'd like to answer David's question by telling a story, and we're just going to say that the student's name is Natalie. Natalie is a student who has gone traditionally to a campus where she learned in person, and COVID introduced Natalie and her family to a new mode of learning where she was able to participate in a virtual setting, use digital tools, had her own device, had access to her teacher when she needed it, and had many opportunities to practice and grow her skill set. Natalie is also a student who had struggled year over year, had not passed a STAR because something just wasn't right in that traditional setting. Fast forward to Natalie's family being presented with a new opportunity for her learning experience. Natalie began to excel in ways that she had never excelled before. And she showed the biggest growth that she had seen over time because she was provided with a learning opportunity that met her and her family's needs. So when you talk about a positive experience of students here in Texas, we were the pandemic brought on experiences that many of our families have never had access to, that ultimately provided their child with the best setting for them. Although virtual learning and virtual options may not be the best solution and setting for all students, for some students, it is exactly what they need.
Mm. That's powerful. I mean, both speaking to the idea of accessibility, right? For students who have learning challenges, how has technology, changed the game for being able to access content that they have not accessed before? And then also to hear about the power of student voice. That's a game changer, and technology has really helped to do that. And, right, there's always an and. So on the one hand, the ability for students to have a greater voice, and that kind of balancing force of, are we going to allow for that? Are we going to design for that? Or do we actually design systems that shut it down? I think these are kind of some of the questions that, regardless of where you are, have to be interrogated, right? Of what do we want to promote? Do we want to help promote student voice and advocacy at an early age? And thinking too, Kia, of your now moving from early learning all the way K-12 and now making connections to higher education practices. I wonder what kinds of trends you see along those lines for how digital inclusion is changing the game in the higher education space and what that's been like.
Absolutely. So I'll speak to that really quickly. When we think about the digital world and one-to-one devices in the K-12 setting, we just got there. But at the university and the higher ed level, that has been the norm, I would say, at least the last decade plus, for students having access to those types of resources. But if we are not doing something to bridge that gap, that transition period that teaches kids, this is how you do this is how to navigate this is what you're going to do on your device. If we're not bridging that gap to prepare them for that secondary level, we're doing them a disservice, right? Because that gap is only going to continue. There are kiddos from that K-12 world who have had access, so can dream big and go and know. In 8th grade, I learned how to do coding, and when I get ready to go to higher ed, I'm going to go on a computer science track. I'm going to be a software engineer, and boom, 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 boom. And then you have kids who have grown up in school systems that did not have access, did not have a vision of, I could do this, I could be this. And so when we think about digital inclusion in all aspects, it starts when they're young, so that as they transition from the K-12 world to the higher ed world, their minds are open to the possibilities. I think about my own life. I did not know that a job like an education strategist existed. I get to support school districts and educators and thought leaders on best practices for using technology in a thoughtful way that transforms the learning experience, the lived experiences of our communities. And so, when I think about it like that, we need to ensure that there is some sort of mentorship model or a connection or ways to open the 4 walls in communities that have historically been shut out, left out, or denied. And so it is a part of, N50, Dell Technology, TEA is working with policies to ensure that kids who haven't had access are getting access. But there has to be strategic alignment from K to higher ed. It's a continuum, and we have to continue to provide service, open their eyes to the opportunities, and make those connections for them. And so I think that speaks to what you were getting at. But if you need some more, Erin,
no, that's beautiful.
guide me.
That's great. Thank you. So I like this framing in the chat. So some say the best way to learn is to fail. I know we've talked a lot about that in the past. And has there been a failure in your experience or in others that resulted in an alternative and successful approaches to digital inclusivity? What comes to mind?
So what comes to mind for me is, and I think I dropped a little snippet about this in the chat, but what we saw in Texas, due to the lack of preparation on our teachers, our school districts, our families, we saw the greatest learning loss that we have seen in the past 10 years. And so Texas was trying to work very quickly to get our students back to where they need to be. But because of that, and because of this pursuit to provide high quality virtual options for our families, what that led to is the intentional design of support programs for school districts. So a program that I lead at the agency is called the Virtual and Hybrid Program Accelerator. And what it allows for is its thoughtful design from start to finish in launching a high quality virtual program for students and families. And in that program, stakeholder engagement is built in. Like, who do we need to have to be include in this conversation? We have teacher and leadership professional development built in. We have coaching opportunities built in. But really, it went down to this design. What we learned is we weren't prepared. So what do we need to do now to make sure that folks are prepared, and being really intentional about the design process, so that our students can continue to succeed and grow in these virtual and digital learning opportunities.
Yeah, and the thing that I'll add to that is, when you know better, you do better. And so when we shifted from how we did traditional instruction in the classroom on a day-to-day basis, it was really important for me as an administrator to support my teachers in. This is not taking a worksheet that you might have had and scanning that worksheet in and putting it in our learning management system and then saying, okay, do this. This isn't retyping questions and making a test and then saying, okay, do this, right? We had to figure out, how do we really change the way we provide instruction, engage with students, so that learning is still fun and they're still accessing the content, right? And so one of the things that I will say is, I don't want to say it was a fail, because again, when you know better, you do better, but really not just taking what we've always done and trying to turn that into a digital worksheet or a digital format. And so really shifting mindsets, really understanding the best practices of digital inclusion, of digital instruction, of blended and personalized learning, really getting teachers to have a stronger understanding of what that looks like and how to allow students to demonstrate their understanding and their knowledge in a different way that isn't specific to a test, to standardized testing, to a project. It's really allowing kiddos to show us what they know, because they know a lot of things. You know, when we think about the performing arts world, is a kiddo who's learning how to play the piano going to go do a paper test and do A, B, C, or D? No, they're going to have a recital and they're going to demonstrate what they know. And that's a beautiful thing. And so when you try to shift, you know, how things have always been done to where we want to go, it's important to think about those things. Like, how can we allow students to demonstrate what they know and learn in a different way and shift our practices as educators?
Yeah, I think that's really insightful, and connecting to your comment about learning loss. I read an article recently that said, and I wrote it down because I thought it was kind of funny, but it said, at the core, learning is lossy, like in general, right? When we learn things, if you think about your experience in school, we have systems set up where we hold on to information and then we get rid of it when we do the final exam, almost giving ourselves permission to say, okay, it's final, I'm done with that, I don't need it anymore. It's lossy. So we know, though, over research and multiple studies, that learning experiences that connect to social and emotional experiences and kind of the vibe of the room and the vibe that I'm experiencing right now, that's going to determine whether I hang on to this learning. And it feels like because of the pandemic, you all have experienced things that either worked or didn't work. And so really appreciate that perspective of connecting to personalized learning and how to meet students where they are. So thank you for that. I'm looking, we've got some questions in the chat. Let's see. Are there some things that we've learned from a Texas perspective about resource settings? So limited by infrastructure, thinking of our rural areas in Texas, that we could learn and apply in other situations, that we could explore that might help with sustainable both practices in education, but also infrastructure wise. And I know that's not really where either of you are coming from, but as far as just hearing in your different roles, if anything's coming to mind around that.
Yeah, I would say for like the limited resources pieces, the infrastructure pieces, what we're hearing from our rural school districts is when it comes to the sustainability piece, there needs to be long-term support and structures on all fronts for those resources pieces. Because when you're talking about rural districts in Texas, it could be a school district with 30 students, with 70 students, very, very small. And so it's difficult for them to put all of their eggs in one basket. And so they tend to try to focus on one mode for all of their students, which is really limiting when it comes to digital inclusion. So I think for me, for the resource piece and really finding out the needs of these specific communities, it's tapping into some of those rural coalitions where there's school leaders who speak to the specific needs of their communities, because oftentimes a lot of these communities partner with some big company that has purchased land in that area, and they are preparing students for that role, but not roles outside of their community. So I would think it's trying to tap into what is the specific need for this community, and then how can we make sure that we put something in place that they can come back to again and again and again, that meets the needs for not just what district leaders are thinking, but connecting to students and families, and how do we target and making sure that everyone has what they need outside of doing what's the easiest thing to do.
With, innovations around private LTE, cell phone providers working with government subsidies, those are some of the interesting things that we're seeing around, and in communities working together, right, to leverage their voices together. And thinking about unique community situations, there is a question in the chat around working with schools that are currently screen-free, right? Maybe learning centers or schools that have not made that shift. What are you seeing as far as working with those teachers and administrators to help shift mindsets toward embracing the digital age, especially since the onset of the pandemic?
This is a great question. The job that Dr. Bown-Anderson, Nichole, and myself on a team when we worked in Austin ISD, this was our day-to-day. The first thing I'll say, in shifting mindsets, that is hard, right? Like, I am comfortable as the teacher. I am comfortable as the administrator. This has worked in the past. It worked for me as a learner, and I think it can continue, right? Those are some of the mindsets that you're going to run into when you are trying to support people in that shift. But one of the things that I will encourage anybody who is experiencing a little bit of resistance, or people who aren't ready to make that switch into a digital world, is one, anchoring it in, we are going to do this, or we can do this in tiny bite-sized steps. I'm not going to flip it overnight, right? Because there are some excellent models out there that exist that are like transformative experiences for students who are capitalizing on technology. But then there are some folks who just aren't there yet, and there are different models of education that don't call for screens. But one of the things that I will say is this type of thing will increase the gap of preparation. Earlier I talked about that transition. There's a gap in terms of achievement. When we think about like governmental policy on No Child Left Behind, that's got its own kind of situation. But when we think about the gap of people who have been exposed and have access to digital tools, digital resources, people who understand how this works and can use it, they're going to continue to give those to kiddos. And then we're still going to have this group of kiddos that are not going to have access and are not going to have those resources, are not going to be introduced to a Chromebook until middle school, right? If they're getting introduced to a Chromebook in middle school, you're going to run into kids who already know how to code in middle school, right? And so really telling them, are we doing right by these learners, by this community, to not give them access to where the rest of the world is going? And so really to just ask questions participants to understand where they're coming from, their thought process, to kind of balance that with data and make those shifts, those steps little by little, go slow to go fast. But it's going to take time and reading and showing models and examples. And I will tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy. There will be times where I coached an educator and it might have taken a whole school year to get them to try a project. But we got there. That's what's important, little by little.
Well, and you really speak to identifying what people's pain points are. And sometimes when you take the time to identify what those pain points are, then the collaborative options kind of start to take shape and come into view, which connects to a question in the chat around thinking about, the N50 partners who are in this space right now come from every corner of the digital ecosystem. And do you have some ideas for some of those collaborative or high leverage projects that we could consider that would help to improve digital inclusivity? Put on your total creative thinking hats. Where do you see some of that collaboration coming together? Possibilities.
It starts with things like this, right? Like opportunities for folks to come together. And I'm the last person to want to add another meeting to folks' calendars, but this is really meaningful work. And so it starts, I think, by building that community of like-minded folks who want to move this work forward, but aren't quite sure how to do that, and bringing in every aspect of the work, someone to represent each aspect of the work, so that we can have these conversations to make a plan forward together. But I think it goes back to creating the space to have these conversations, but not just having the conversations, making sure that there's actions associated with the conversations and discussions to continue to move the work forward.
Yeah. And I think that's a great note kind of to wrap up our conversation together around staying in silos keeps us from innovation, right? Which is actually, we're going to be moving into a session talking about how to generate those innovative ideas. So I can't thank you enough for sort of setting the stage for the why at the greatest, most foundational level of thinking through the lens of education. Really, really appreciate you both taking the time today to engage in this conversation and answer hard questions for which the answers I think everyone in the room is really grappling with. So thank you both. And I am going to, let you both just say a quick, if you want to say anything to wrap up, and then we'll turn it over.
All I would say is teamwork makes the dream work. So thank you so much. I am truly honored to have been invited to speak here with you all today. Looking at the participant list, it looks like a roster of amazing people with lots of amazing questions to innovate on in the future. So thank you for having us today. And I look forward to the continued partnership and collaboration in the future.
We do too. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful morning. I hope you were able to drink your coffee and eat your breakfast while we had this dialogue, but I have truly enjoyed my time this morning, and I will make sure that Dr. Bown-Anderson and the team have my contact information in case anybody would like to connect afterwards.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you both, Nokia and Nichole. At this time, I'm going to pass the baton over to the Geeks Without Frontiers